Welcome to Building Healthy Relationships, the 4 Habits podcast, helping you enjoy better harmony at home, thrive at work, and win at life. Here are your hosts, Dr. Andrea and Jon Taylor-Cummings, recognized authorities on the subjects of improving work relationships and cultures, as well as couple and home relationships.
Well, hello and a warm welcome to our guests around the world, the next in the series of our 4 Habits podcast. Delighted, as usual, to have a wonderful new guest with us. We'll be talking today with Pam Collis. Pam, thank you for making the time to be with us today.
Delighted to be here.
Wonderful. We want to give you your proper introduction. So Jon's going to share a little bit of the bio so that our guests will understand the wealth of information that will be coming from somebody as experienced as yourself. So let's hear about Pam's background.
Let's do it justice. So Pamela Collis is a consultant at Family Law in Partnership with over 35 years of experience of family law matters. Pamela's primary focus is international and domestic family law issues, particularly the financial aspects of relationship breakdown, private law children matters, including surrogacy and international relocation, and pre- and post-nuptial agreements. Pam is renowned for her pragmatic and constructive style and her strategic vision. The leading directories ranking family law specialists have identified Pam as having a rare combination of being fiercely intelligent and having amazing client skills. And we have come to be aware of those through the work. Pam has been so kind in giving us time in structuring an offering that we've been developing for the family law market.
Absolutely.
In terms of supporting people who are going through separation and divorce to do that well and to do that with as well as possible. These are challenging times for people.
Salvaging some of the relationship.
But when we spoke with Sir Paul Coleridge in the UK here, who we initially approached to help us develop this offering for that marketplace, he said, guys, you need to be speaking to Pam Collis. She is in this space of mediation and understanding family law. You need to speak to Pam Collis. And oh my goodness, we really discovered why that is from the conversations we've had. So Pam, it's a real honor to have you with us on the show today. Thank you for joining us, and let's dive in.
Yeah, as Jon said, either people, what we've discovered from you, Pam, is you're so well known in the industry that people know you, and seniors in other law firms have probably worked for you in the past. That's
either with or for at some point.
So we would just love to get behind your story a bit to understand what's the passion, what got you into the work that you're doing in family law, and what's the passion that still drives you, even though, I don't want to use the word retire, because I don't ever see you retiring. I think you'll always be going forward with that passion. So what got you into it, and what's the change that you want to see? What's your passion in this space?
I'll talk briefly about how I got into family law, which is the most fascinating of areas. Obviously, first and foremost, I trained as a lawyer. For me, the law is about courts and judges and things like that. But when I was training, I found that I just couldn't get as enthusiastic about commercial disputes as I could about family disputes. And they are absolutely fascinating because no 2 cases are the same. They have the most extraordinary elements. People get in extraordinary situations. And you really need to be very, very creative to get people out of that, not necessarily in terms of the law. And that's the other part that I love about it, is the fact that you are trying to get 2 people to do something they don't really want to do in the way that the other wants it done. And you have to get them together to bring them round using a sort of combination of psychological persuasion, tricks almost, things have worked in the past, and something that's new. And I find that, giving people new ideas about how they might sort out their problems and giving them options. So having to produce, I always try to produce several ideas, has been a really kind of good way to deal with things, because then people feel that they have taken the decisions, they picked one of those options, and they will then work with it. And there are lots of other tricks about getting people to look forward and getting them to think about how things are going to impact. But I just love all that sort of psychological juggling I've found it very beneficial in my own life, beneficial for my friends to have the benefit of that kind of approach. So that's, and I feel that I'm good at it. And obviously, when we're good at something, it also means that you feel very satisfied with it. So that's why I'm doing it. But my passion for family law, and for couples generally, actually, is to have more insight into what they're doing and more tools to do things better. And I think everyone who's in a long-term relationship has hit the buffers at some point in the relationship, and many give up at that point. And they don't, if they had the skills, either because of prior training or they're made available then, they could save their marriage or their long-term relationship. And I think that's one of my passions. But I also have a passion about the way that family law is conducted. So this is concentrating on people who've had family breakdown. The system is very slowly being amended, and family law is amended all the time because it's one of the most fast-moving. But there's such a long way to go. One of for instance, there's been quite an interesting movement called Language Matters. And that has been developed and has now been adopted by the president of the family division. And he has asked all lawyers to be mindful of the language that they use, to stop using defendant, applicant. Or he hasn't said that, but that's where we hope to go. And family law and partnership is very much involved in that. It's very much in our ethos to try and stop talking about position statements or the other side or the other party or all these terms which I've grown up with. In over 40 years, it's always been the same terms. I think they are finally going to get phased out, and that will make a big difference, so that when people are having to deal perhaps with an issue about their children, they're not necessarily called mother and father. They're called their first names or their second names, if that's better. And the language is all amended to make sure that it's not about parental rights. It's about parental responsibilities. It's about reaching an accommodation. And the hope is that change of language will knock on to social services, who apparently, I'm not an expert in that, but apparently need to also change their language, rather surprisingly. And that will happen. And so step by step, one aspect which is really unsatisfactory will get improved and will be much more conducive to sorting things out with focus on the family unit and focus on the children, rather than
am I right
the other
in
side.
Understanding just quickly what you were saying? Am I right in understanding that the language is about personalizing it a little bit more, as you say, removing it from defendant, respondent, plaintiff, whatever, all that sort of legalese to make it more about the individual and
more relational,
more relational. That's what I'm really picking up on. The rest of it, I'm less fussed about. But the purpose, I'll say it is 5 things. 1, that things are in plain English. 2nd, that they are personal.
Right. Yep.
3rd, that the terms used are proportionate. 4th, that they are problem solving.
Instead of problem solving.
And finally, that the language is leading to positive futures.
Right.
So
I figure there was a
because you can change the language and it changes the thinking and you get a different outcome. So I think this is something that's already going on, but my passion is really about how we can educate people so that their relationships in all parts of their life actually will be better. and in particular, how we can educate people, including the lawyers, so that any breakdown is dealt with in the soundest of ways, in the ways
Yeah.
that make the least ripples. Someone can't say, your father behaved appallingly. He did this, he did that. Just that he won't have behaved appallingly because he will know better. It's a huge ask
because you're dealing with people and the emotions of the moment, aren't you?
People in a stressful situation, yeah.
But also you're dealing with a huge number of people.
Yeah.
But I love that wisdom to recognize that the language being used is actually inflaming an already very tense and stressful situation. How can we choose words that will bring more calm and salvage whatever's left of the relationship? And I know that's been your heart. You started by saying if only people could get the skills either before or during the conflict to rescue their marriage or their long-term relationship. What have you seen with that happening? Is there really hope once people get to the point of coming to yourselves as your company as a family lawyer? Have you seen people get a new insight, understanding, new skills, and actually change?
Yes. I mean, I think people they are definitely moving, but it's not very great numbers. So,
Right.
for instance, a lot of my clients will have therapy because I ask that they do if they can, or I recommend it. So they're getting therapy. They're probably taking some of the rows to the therapist, and they're probably getting good guidance on how to deal with it, and probably being directed to remember their children at all times and that sort of thing. So going to a therapist is no longer a silent thing. Clients are very open. Do you think I should see a therapist?
Right.
Including men who've tended, in my experience, to be very reluctant, particularly professional men. Well, all men, actually. They are more ready to take that step, and they understand why. So I think therapy is helping, but therapy is, in a way, a luxury for many people who are going through family breakdown, and it's not possible, and it's a bit late in a way. So, I mean, I had thought about, relationship education, say in the sixth form at school. So that's the last 2 years of school. I gather, and I don't know if you guys agree, but I gather that education at school is much less effective than education with young adults once they've left school. And I can kind of imagine that might be so, but I don't know. But clearly, if the government's going to be persuaded to put any money into this, or it will need to be targeted. And so it is a big ask. But my vision is that I would just love everybody who has the chance to have a very short amount of relationship training. And I mean, if I just speak personally, I've been taught a few things as a result of being a family lawyer on how to handle things, and it's been huge in the rest of my life. It's enabled me to deal better with my husband when there's inevitably some friction about something. Enabled me to deal with situations where I have felt that I need to say something unpleasant to somebody because they have done something unpleasant. But in the past, despite being a litigation lawyer, I'm not hugely confrontational. And in the past, I might often have chickened out unless it was for my clients. And now in my personal life, I have a very small number of tools for which I use. And I mean, for me, it's just making sure that I understand whether I have control or not of a situation, and identifying that. It sounds very simple, but I didn't used to. And if I can't control it, well, I can't do anything much about it.
Yes.
And actually,
so no
all
point
the
to
worry
stress.
evaporates. It's gone. Woo. And the other tool I use a lot is the feedback loop. which is rather more complex, but not difficult. And with things like that, I can make my life much better. And I can say things to my clients without offending them. They can hear something difficult without going off the deep end.
Yeah.
Most wonderful tools for life. And I, I'm not a trained psychologist at all. I'm sure there's masses more, but I don't think people need that much to stop themselves and say, I'm in a tricky emotional situation here. Am I in control? Am I not? Is this argument about me, or is it about the other person? If it's about the other person, how can I say something without,
escalating it? Yeah.
Escalating, making them unable to hear. How can I say it so they can hear what I need to say? And just some very simple things like that have been huge to me, and I would imagine might be huge to other people.
Yeah, you were so on the same page with that, with relationship education, and the more understanding we can get up front, the more we can deal with the inevitable conflict or frustrations. And also the more we can avoid getting into a really bad place because we've navigated the difficulties with more skill.
Yes.
So have you seen, do you have any stories of people where their relationship has actually been rescued because they've developed or learned some skills?
I hadn't had, I used to have quite a lot of cases where the parties reconciled. And it's a funny thing, but when you're a young lawyer, you have young clients. And young clients are very impetuous, or they were then. And so they would often have a massive row, and you'd be knocking on my door the next day. And I had quite a simple test, which was, do you still fancy her? And if the answer was yes, I said, right, well, you just got to go away and work at this.
Yeah.
It should be fine. And if they said no, I said, okay.
Okay, we've got something to work on.
This was just the test. Then I didn't. And then as I've got older, my clients are now in their 50s, 60s, 70s and more. And older people tend to be less impetuous and will put up with situations in a marriage which a young person would not put up with. And so recently my clients have tended to be pretty steady Eddie. They come, they want a divorce. But I did recently have a situation where a couple of very nice people, I couldn't really understand why they were getting divorced. And I wasn't sure that they did either. And to cut a long story short, after they were actually divorced, they kind of reached out to each other to say sorry.
Oh, amazing.
And they had both had the benefit of therapy. And I think that combination had enabled them to figure out what had in fact gone wrong and to address it.
Yeah.
And I think it showed to me the power of therapy, the power of having lawyers who were saying, perhaps you want to reflect on this. It came a bit late in the day, but it did happen.
Yeah.
But it is very difficult for people to do that. And and particularly I find, older clients have gone through everything. They have tried really, really hard, and they have usually had the benefit of therapeutic advice, and they've probably hung on in a relationship that wasn't perfect to get the children off to university. And they, that's it. It's not going to be saved.
Yeah.
But I do think young people, there's a huge opportunity for saying, hang on a minute, you only married 5 years ago.
Yeah.
She turned into a witch over that period. What's going on here?
Yeah.
And if you're not, trigger happy with divorce proceedings, and I think that good practitioners can see when a marriage is definitely over and when it's possibly not. I can't tell you what but I certainly know that. I don't. Some people I don't bother to say anything. And other people, I say, are you absolutely sure about this? So
Yeah.
we get a feel that may prompt something. And then if the people have the skills, because one of the things that occurred to me was that people who have had therapy or who have gone through 12-step programs will probably be much better at dealing with making amends, which is often needed and may
Correct.
repair a relationship.
Well, just even going right back to where you started at the beginning, you spoke about relationship education in schools versus for young people who've just left school and so on. It got my mind thinking, actually, perhaps why it isn't as transformational or as impactful for the young people in schools is because quite often a lot of it is theory. Yes, they may be sort of just getting towards relationships, and these days actually young people are in relationships as well. But
multiple by then.
But nonetheless, it's still very it's high level. It's not intense, deep relationships at that stage in the game. The deeper the relationship gets, the more the challenges can come out, and therefore the more the tools that you need. And again, even to your point about couples who have been married or in sort of stable relationships for a few years versus those who've been in relationships in those kinds of relationships for 20 years, the grooves just get deeper and deeper and deeper. And the deeper those grooves get, the more difficult it is or can be to get out of them. And in our experience, really, once you're in the trenches, it's very difficult to get out of those trenches without new information. You've got to be able to lift yourself up out of the trenches to see the trench and go, oh my goodness, is that where I was?
And is that what I've done to
And is that what I've done? And we talk about this concept of getting more understanding to be more understanding. But who was it, Einstein, who said you can't solve a problem with the same level of thinking that got you there. You've got to get new information.
Yes.
And I think, call it what you will, whether it's therapists, whether it's counseling, whether it's reading books, whatever it is, you've got to get that new information that gives you those new insights. And we, in our experience, we've come across therapists, and they're sort of different levels of impact. What would you say makes for good therapy? In your experience, what has worked, or for those couples who have made it through and somehow found a way to be civil to each other, or either get back together or at least be civil to each other? What kind of tools or tips or tricks or what approaches have you seen work for them?
I mean, they're not really within my professional life that I've seen them, but the sort of things that I have various people that I send people to. Mm-hmm. I have in the past recommended the marriage course, which is Nikki and Scylla's course.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And one of the solicitor members of my team did it with her long-term boyfriend. And so she was a family lawyer herself. She thought it was absolutely fantastic. She was very, very impressed. And that's the sort of thing that would be within the reach of most people financially. I have one of my closest friends is pretty much the country's best couples psychotherapist. And she has worked with people that I've sent her, who I've seen one spouse for a first appointment and said, I think you should actually go and see this person. And it usually, and these will be people more my age, so it usually takes at least a year. But it's very, very deep. It's really pulling out what's been going on for over a long period and working on it. And she's done that for, I don't know, maybe a handful over the years of my clients. So that's not a big one. But if somebody can afford that that is probably the best, particularly for a long marriage.
And when you say a year of what? Of weekly meetings, monthly
meetings?
Weekly. Wow.
Weekly meetings. That's a really good point to pick up on, because sometimes when people find themselves, as John described, in the trenches, stuck in frustration and not being able to see eye to eye, they want a quick fix. They want a magic pill that will just undo this or cause them to separate and it will all be over. But of course, that's just the beginning of a new set of problems if you haven't sorted out the relationship. And for those where the problem's been brewing for a long time, it will take time and an investment and a commitment to work it through. What have you seen? What are the messages that you would like to maybe share with couples to help them not stay in a abusive
No.
or horrible situation if the relationship needs to
Yeah, because
end?
that's not good for anybody. For
That's not
them,
good
for
for
the children
anybody.
involved, the conflict can be a real problem.
So if they need to separate, we're not saying don't separate. But what would you say to people to make them really think twice or put the effort in to have another go at the relationship before going down the separation route? What are the things that you've seen in terms of impact that you'd
Yes,
encourage people to think about?
I think I would encourage a spouse who's unhappy to journal,
Mm-hmm.
to write on a daily basis what is going wrong for them so that they can see the pattern.
Mm-hmm.
Depending on their financial position, I would suggest if they've got a relationship problem that they could go to Codependence Anonymous,
Mm-hmm.
which is not going to provide a fast fix, but will provide an excellent fix, excellent, long-term in all relationships.
Mm-hmm.
But most people are more desperate than that. So
Yeah.
if so, they need to figure out whether the problem is them or the problem is their other half or the problem is both. Because if the problem is them, then they need to do some individual work.
Yes.
And it may not be that long, because they've recognized they've got a problem. But if it's the other partner or it's both of them together, then they do need to see a couples therapist who will probably recommend that the other partner does individual therapy in addition. But then at least, I as a spouse don't have to say to my spouse, you need to see a therapist.
Yeah.
Someone else is going to do that. And I think that there are some excellent books. There's a book by Joe Harrison, who is a therapist at my firm, called something like The 7 Arguments That All Couples Need to Have, which talks about what creates arguments, what you can do about them, and why arguing is not bad.
Yeah.
Necessarily.
We have the book actually. It's actually 5 arguments all couples need to have. Yes.
Yeah.
There you go.
And
By
I
Joe.
think that's quite a light read and quite good for anybody. And there are lots of books about the relationships in marriage, but it's finding something that's not too dense.
Yes.
And I think the problem for people whose marriages are in distress is that they actually can't really read.
Yeah, they can't absorb.
Not able to, not in that space. But I'm intrigued, Pam. You mentioned that people need to get to the point of figuring out where the problem is with them, with themselves, with the other party, or with both. How much when people come to you, how open are they to seeing a problem in themselves? Because in our experience, it's always the other party's fault. How open are they to hearing that? Even we know that's not the reality, but how?
They don't put it. But if you have a good EQ, then you are able to say, this business about not doing the washing up. What do you think that's about? And then it's because for some reason I've picked up a vibe that it's a punishment or it's a this or that. And people, when you actually go into it and people start opening up a little bit, they do begin to see. And some people do say, well, I'm a bit of a pushover, so I've kind of brought this on myself.
Yeah.
And that's at that point, I would probably say, if you don't think it's completely the wrong thing for you, you might want to look at CODA, because it sounds like you're codependent.
Yes.
And a lot of people just, it's not for them. It's too closely associated with other 12-step addiction programs. And they don't think it's appropriate. But I very strongly believe in CODA. I think it's really, really good for anybody.
What's the reality of life after separation in terms of, sometimes the expectation, I think, is I have a problem with my spouse. It's not going away. We can't find a way forward. The best thing for both of us is to end the relationship, and then the problem goes away. Does the problem go away after separation and divorce?
I think that's a very mixed answer is the answer, because I've had the experience of clients from as long as 40 years ago phone up out of the blue and say, I just thought you'd like to know how the children are doing. And
Wow.
and ironically, they've also said, and I think I didn't behave very well, and that may or may not be true. I honestly can't remember at that point. But these are people who clearly have had some help. I think that they know they ought to apologise, even though I can't remember that they were unpleasant at the time. But most of them say, but, it was such a horrible time. And yet you'd be astonished. You'd be really pleased how things have worked out. And the children are doing this and the children are doing that.
Wow.
So it's and then I've had quite a few clients say to me, the best thing that ever happened to me was getting divorced. And I think that is where there is a really bad problem in the relationship. And it's just never going to work. And they had been stuck for some years and suddenly they're free. However, I think most of the population in this country, when they get divorced, are financially in a very tricky situation, because what was barely covering one home has got to stretch for two. And that's not a reason to stay married, but I think it is a reason to think very carefully.
Yes.
And it's usually women and children who suffer still. Not always now. I mean, it is improving, but it tends still to be the wife and the kids and those women find it very hard to move on. The man moves on, he does well at work and gets paid a bit more, and the woman is really very stuck, and possibly not highly remarriageable because she's got small children or something, and she doesn't look that eligible as a result. So it's a very, very mixed picture, very mixed picture.
Do you know what's interesting is I ran a workshop a couple of weeks ago, and unusually, I think uniquely, there were two participants in a breakout session. They discovered that they both had parents who had divorced and remarried. We
don't see a lot of that. I think in the work that we've been doing over the 30 years, I think we know of two other couples who have done that. So to come across two on the same day of the same workshop for us was a rarity. Do you see much of that? Or have you seen much of that?
Well, there is you're probably aware that divorce goes down the familial line. So if your parents are divorced, the chances of you getting divorced is much higher. And I find that very worrying, because if 50% of the population are getting divorced, well, they're not actually. It's about 30 at the moment here. But that means 1 in 3. So the chances of the next generation having one divorced parent are incredibly high. They almost certainly will have. I mean, that's a big worry if it is the influence. And that's another reason why having a nice divorce makes such a difference if you've got children, because I've got lots of friends whose parents got divorced, and there's some are very angry still, and some are fine. It wasn't ideal, but their parents didn't row. They always put the children first. They turned up at the high holidays and weddings and so on as a united couple, as united parents. So if we could just improve the language, improve the psychology, and improve things so that the lawyers are behind doing things nicely, which will cut down their work because they won't go to court as often, and this is a big problem. I mean, I think your American listeners would be very, very interested to know that when I talked about the Language Matters project, the president of the family division not only said the things I mentioned before, but he also said, and I do not like it, something like this, I'm paraphrasing, I do not like the fact that in the various legal directories, there are references to, such and such a person being a real beast of a litigator.
Right.
And, arguing your corner and making sure you win and so on. He said, I don't think we should be publishing directories that say anything like that. Now, there are always some family lawyers who fall into that category of highly aggressive. And So our president is saying, I don't want them publicised.
Mm-hmm.
And I believe that the system in the US is much more litigious than ours.
Yeah.
And they'll probably be astonished to learn that the
Yeah.
senior judge is saying, I don't want these things.
Yeah.
This is not about crushing and dominating. It's about getting a good result, but a good result that everybody can come out of it from, or come out of it with.
Do you think that's going to take, to get the language changed and to get people behind trying to salvage relationships as much as possible, is that going to need a real shift in culture, in family law in general? Maybe, speaking for the UK, for example.
I mean, I think we're pretty good because as UK lawyers, because we have had a body set up by the solicitors, which has championed constructive approaches.
Right.
And we've had that almost, I think it was exactly the same time that I qualified. So 1981, since 1981, that has been sending a very, very strong message. And pretty much now, every family lawyer in the country is a member of Resolution. And we are barraged with psychological education, constructive education, all these things. It's very, very strong. And I think most of the sort of diehards have died.
Right.
Oh, okay.
But particularly, I think, in London and some of the other major cities, where there is very, very significant wealth, there are still some very aggressive lawyers.
Yeah.
Not really a problem. There probably need to be for some of our international clients and so on. But where there is aggression elsewhere, if there still is, and I think there probably is a bit, that needs to go. But I think it's more than that. I think we can, if we wish, perform an incredibly important role in people's lives. And there are things like pre-nuptial agreements, which actually are very difficult to handle for the lawyer, and we think they're the ones where all the negligence claims will be made. Really, really difficult legally and very difficult emotionally. But if you can approach it with lots of life experience and empathy, it can make the most incredible difference. If you don't, the engagement may be off. It's.
But it takes courage to be able to do that and recognize that actually, you know what, this is the right thing to do.
Yes.
Even though you're losing money.
I don't get any fees on this one, but it's the right thing to do.
But I think we're fortunately, I think most of us are less fee orientated than other areas of the law because we are people who enjoy people. We're people.
Yeah.
And
that's what I meant about the culture change.
Yes.
So
it's in progress. The culture change is in progress, but we're not educated enough to do it as well as we might.
Yeah.
I think as people learn what the impact of divorce is on children, and as you get more senior and you see the cases and how they turn out maybe 20 years later, what's happened with everybody, I think we become clearer and clearer that we have to, I feel that we have to consider all these other things which are way outside our legal training, to do with the children, to do with the impact on the people. We have a completely different, or certainly I have a completely different approach to, say, a commercial litigator, because I learned very early on when I was newly qualified. I got some fantastic results for family law clients because I really, really, really tried hard. Thought that's what I needed to do. And actually, two of them I heard recently, I mean, we're talking 40 years later, I realised soon after, when I moved on to other cases, I shouldn't have won. I got too good at, you can get too good a deal, particularly with children, and it's not the right thing.
Yeah.
And, the client ought to complain, really, but, they that was a good result. Oh, you did so well. And it's not that, so one learns that we're not like the rest of the litigation world. We've got to do what is right for the family as a whole, what is right in the long term.
Yeah.
Yes.
You may have won that battle, but the war.
Yeah.
What was the outcome there?
what are the themes that you're seeing as the reasons for the divorce that could become warning lights for couples to deal with before they get to that point? What are the things that end up, if you
They
could
are
name
so
them?
varied. I mean, the common theme is that people don't talk about
Right.
the issue.
Mm-hmm.
And so for the vast majority of people, there are definitely issues. You know, someone's not doing their fair share of the domestic work. Someone's not pulling their weight financially. They're not. It's 1,000 things.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, in some cases, very serious stuff, domestic violence and so on. That's in a different
Sure.
category. But for your, you know, your average situation, I think it's just that the things are not tackled and not dealt with. And sometimes they are tackled. Like a wife will say, you know, you're being a workaholic, I never see you, da, da, da. And of course, the guy carries on because he is addicted to work. And if it becomes so bad that she says, well, I've got to go for a divorce, you know, even then one feels, gosh, you wouldn't have to talk to too many people to find out there are ways of tackling this problem, or ways of him tackling this problem.
Yeah, exactly.
That would have saved what had been a perfectly good marriage. So I think it's those skills of how to say difficult things that I feel I've been very privileged to have been given. And I don't think they're that difficult. And I think most people could take it on board.
Yeah, and that's applying them in your own relationship. But I think even going back to what you were saying a moment ago about family lawyers having the skills to be able to support their clients in this space is just so important, because yes, you know, going through law school, etc., you'll be absolutely given the hard skills to do the job, but how much of the what used to be called the soft skills, but really the human skills to be able to connect with your clients, but to impart some of that knowledge to the client so that they can have better relationships themselves is just so important. I'm conscious of time. We could talk all day long, I think, Pam. Well, this is such wonderful insights coming from you. But in parting, as we go, is there any one particular bit of advice that you would want to pass on to people who are considering separation or divorce, or going through it? They're really at the coalface. They're in the trenches. They're feeling the pain. What any particular advice that you would give them?
Yes, definitely. If they've got enough time, if they can hang on long enough to get some therapy, or to go to CODA, or to get some skills, so that they can see. Because I often say to people, you married this person. Were you in love? Yes, I was in love. Usually my question then is, do you still fancy them?
Yeah.
And
do you still ask the 50 and 60-year-old ones? Do you still fancy them?
No. Hopeless.
That's only the younger ones.
No. So, I think that they can do some work to see if they can salvage the marriage.
Yeah.
And they can do some couples counselling without having to do too much if they realise that they do still really care.
Yeah.
And they've got the children perhaps, and they can pull themselves out of it. That would be my advice, to try and get some help.
Yeah.
The other thing that I don't know whether there is help available very much or not is that within some of the religious communities, there is pre-marriage tuition, which I think is partly about this sort of thing, partly about other things. But and there may be an ability to go back to the person that taught you and say, we've run into a problem. And there are some, certainly in my own community, there are the support for brides. I'm not sure about grooms, but there's support for brides. And if something goes for a few months, but if you hear of people phoning up their kind of mentor and saying, he's asking for sex 5 times a day. Is that what I have to do? But that is helpful.
Yeah.
That is helpful.
I love the point you made, which kind of captures all the different things, whether it's sex or money or housework. It's how can we get better at those courageous conversations,
Conversations,
at
Yes.
having that
talking
talk.
about the
Yes.
things that might feel difficult or hard or easier to sweep things under the carpet and not address it. But how can we build those skills to have those difficult conversations? Because maybe, just maybe, there's better understanding and a way forward together at the other side of pushing through and doing that. I think that's brilliant, wonderful insights that we can all go and act on, do something about. Any final words, Pam, that you want to share, things you wanted to say that we might not have covered?
I mean, I've got lots of advice for solicitors, but I don't think that's what you need. Yes, I mean, the word HERE is an acronym for honesty, empathy, autonomy, and reflection.
Okay.
And is used by some as a sort of psychological tool. And it did
Right.
seem to me that all of that was relevant to long-term relationships, of trying to deal with things with honesty, empathy, autonomy, and reflection.
That's wonderful. And I'm hoping autonomy in there, they mean what are the things that you own and take responsibility for?
Yeah.
Yes.
Because that's usually a missing bit.
Yes.
And of course, reflection
Absolutely.
is you get better the next time if you reflect on how you did it this time and what didn't work so well and what you can do better next time. So that's brilliant.
Which is, if you don't learn the lesson, you got to repeat the class, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
You don't want to stay in the same class.
Yeah. No, that's wonderful. Well, I think given time, you've been so generous with your time already, but thank you so much, Pam. We've really enjoyed the conversation. Maybe, in the future we can arrange another one, but
That'd be wonderful.
keep shining your amazing light in the family law area and making the changes that we need for the hope and future of families going forwards. So thank you very much for being with us.
No, you're very, very welcome. It's a pleasure.
And to our listeners around the world, we say thanks for being with us, and we'll see you next time.
See you on the next one.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
We hope you enjoyed that episode. And if you did, and you want to hear more, the best thing to do is subscribe. Then you'll never miss an episode. There's a new one every Friday. You can stay connected with us on social media at The 4 Habits for updates, behind-the-scenes content, and to participate in discussions related to the show. We always love to hear from you. And of course, if you've enjoyed this podcast, please leave us a review on your preferred platform to allow us to reach more listeners and help people around the globe radically transform the way they do relationships so they too can enjoy better harmony at home, thrive at work, and win at life.